Welcome to the session for multiple domains and the Jamf Infrastructure Manager for LDAP. I introduce to you Mike Wallach.
Thank you, everyone. Excited to be here. This is my first presentation at JNUC, second year in a row. I am Mike Wallach. I am the Director of Apple Technologies at Manulife. In the US, we do business as John Hancock, but globally, we do business as Manulife. I have 18 years of IT experience supporting consumers and the enterprise and higher ed, so quite a vast background of knowledge. And most of that has been spent supporting Macs. Today we're going to talk about multiple domains and the Jamf Infrastructure Manager for LDAP. Our agenda starts with our dilemma and the issue we ran into having multiple domains and the current setup that Jamf supports. We'll go over our setup and some of the challenges we ran into during that process. We'll do a quick demo to show you guys how we set everything up and the script that we use to sort of build everything out. We'll hear a word from Jamf, and at the end we'll take some questions. So, our dilemma. We have 11 domains globally that we required authentication to for both Jamf Pro access, for our help desk and technicians, and then also self-service for policies that are scoped to users via different groups. So Jamf would only support one LDAP connection with Jamf Cloud per infrastructure manager server. So what we found was that we were going to have to essentially set up 11 servers to support this. Unfortunately, we have co-located data centers, and the cost to run 11 servers just to run the small payload of Infrastructure Manager just wasn't going to be cost effective for us. So what did we do? We worked with Jamf and Oliver Lindsay from Professional Services to bring Jim support to RHEL. At the time, it only supported Ubuntu. And a custom script was developed to create several individual instances on one server. For each instance, we had a dedicated port for listening for the traffic. We had an init.d startup file, logs, and a config file. Jamf gave us recommendations for the server at the time. Again, they did not support RHEL or Windows Server. It was just Ubuntu. But now they currently support Ubuntu 14 or 16 LTS, Red Hat 7 through 7.2, Windows Server 2008 R2 through 2012 R2. You need a 64-bit capable processor. You need 2 gigs of RAM, 300 meg of space, and Java 1.8. When we set this up, we went with a little bit beefier machine because we knew we were going to run everything on one server. So we set up a VM running a 64-bit processor, 8 gigs of RAM, 60 gigs of hard drive space, RHEL 7, and Java 1.8. We had to open several firewall ports. We're in financial services, so our network is very secure. We were allowed to open an outbound port for 443 from our gym to Jamf Pro. In order to do this, it had to be an IP-based rule. So we had to get the IP for Jamf Pro by doing an NS lookup. So we did an NS lookup to our Jamf Pro URL to get the IP address needed in order to open that firewall port. We needed inbound ports from Jamf Cloud and their recommended IP ranges from AWS to our gym. Jamf recommends port 8389 if you're running one instance, but in fact, any port above 1024. And we opened port 636 from our infrastructure manager to our LDAP server for LDAP-S traffic. Some of the risks that we had were Jamf does not offer an official method for installing multiple instances on the same server. We were, through this process, we were trying to sort of find something that was cost effective for us, but also something that would be officially supported from Jamf. In order to do this, we had to work very closely with pro services at the time. Also, infrastructure manager, again, as we mentioned, only ran on Ubuntu, and we were only allowed to use Red Hat in our data center. So, because Jamf did not officially support the multiple instance setup, anything that could go wrong, and did in many cases, required pro services to help us out, and they were great. We were able to get in touch with Oliver Lindsay, and then just support was able to loop in pro services to assist us with the various setups that we were trying to go through. So just to kind of cover what we did, the infrastructure manager, the file structure, has several different pieces to it in order to work. It places a file in init.d, several files in etc jamf.im, different files in USR share, doc, and then jamf.im. And then still with USR share, some more files. And then at the end, they also put a file in varlog for logging. There's several different files that go into the varlog jamf.im name. There's a symbolic link to bin jamf.im for each instance. And then the Felix cache goes in var lib jamf.im. And with the script that we have, we create a user and a group for each instance. So the group doesn't change, it's always Jamf service, but the user does change to Jamf service _ whichever instance we're running in order to be able to enroll the instance and have rights to it. So just going to go through a quick demo, show you how we would set it up. The demo is set up running CentOS. Again, that's not supported. In order to kind of get support for this, it has to be running on RHEL or Ubuntu or Windows Server. So here I've already uploaded the files that I need to install locally to the server. I'm just installing Java here. Again, it has to be the JDK. And I installed JDK 1.8. And then go through. And this is where we actually unpack the infrastructure manager installer so that it puts everything into a directory, which we'll use to then copy out later. So you'll see it unpacks everything mentioned earlier into the working directory I was in. And then we have a script that does sort of all the magic. So the script goes through, takes everything, creates, in this case, 2 instances. We have, as I mentioned earlier, 11 that we're running, so we know that that does work. One note is that in the bin jamf.im file, you do have to go in and change this one line where it tries to change the ownership to include the actual instance user that was created. We're working to figure out where the bug is in that. So I do that twice for both the test instances that we set up. And then now we can go through a standard infrastructure manager enrollment. So the process for this is no different than if you were just running a single infrastructure manager. It's just Jamf IM, instance name, and then enroll. Put in the URL. Username and pass. And then the host name is the external host name that your Jamf Pro will be looking to resolve to connect to the infrastructure manager. So here you see when it tries to reload, you get an OK. Had I not gone and changed the bin file and the user ID in that file, that would have failed. And then this is just us going through and installing it again on the enrolling the second instance. And again, comes back, everything's okay. So that's as easy as it is to set up, in this case, 2 instances. There's one line in the script that we'll have a link to later that you have to change and edit and add your instance names in. But once you do that, it's that simple. And then just to show you how this looks when it's actually enrolled. So go to settings. There we go. Infrastructure managers, and you'll see we have both instances enrolled. I had pre-created LDAP connections. But then here you would select which LDAP proxy server you're looking to use. Again, this is the port. Any port can be used above 1024. And then if one is in use, it will actually show you that. That's actually how we found that you could only run one instance at a time for LDAP. And that's it. So once you've kind of run the script and it unpacks and installs everything, then you would just go in, run the enrollment, go through this to attach the infrastructure manager to your LDAP server. And then, again, we did this for 11 different setups, but it works for as little as 2. Some important notes. Again, the infrastructure manager requires port 443 to your actual Jamf Pro IP found with an NSLOOKUP on the initial connection. So we originally tried to do it using Jamf's list of IPs for AWS. Again, this is for Jamf Cloud. And found that that didn't work. In the log, it would report an error because it was trying to actually resolve the actual IP, public IP of the Jamf Pro. And so the infrastructure manager will also require either split scope DNS or a hosts file entry in order to obtain its own internal IP address. Our hosts file has entries, again, because of where it sits in our DMZ for our domain controllers, and then also for itself to resolve itself. One thing, a best practice recommendation from Jamf is to create a least privileged user account for this. So under settings, Jamf Pro user accounts and groups, you create a user, and then under privileges, and then Jamf Pro server objects, you'll want to grant the create, read, and update rights to infrastructure manager instances. Again, you can use any account that has those rights, but we created an account specifically for that. Some of the known issues, when the var log, jamf log fills, the gem will stop working. So if it gets, I think ours hit about 200 megabytes and it completely stopped accepting connections. A great blog by Rich Troughton recommends how to do log rotation, and that will alleviate that issue. Another thing we've seen is that if one instance stops working, Jamf Pro will show error calculating scope errors in the policy payload under the management tab. And then this requires a restart on the server to be performed. This started sometime in Jamf Pro 9, and then it continues in Jamf Pro 10 as well. And then again, if the IP address of your Jamf Pro changes and you have IP-based rules outbound, your Jamf Pro in the notification center will actually start telling you that your infrastructure manager has not checked in. They should continue to work as normal. Our instances, our IPs have changed recently. We don't have the firewall rules yet open to the new IPs, and so we are getting that error message that they have not checked in, but everything seems to be working fine. Couple of resources for everyone. This is the Jamf knowledge base article for permitting inbound and outbound traffic with Jamf Cloud. This has all of the AWS IPs in all their regions that you will have to whitelist inbound traffic from for infrastructure manager. So it'd be their IPs and then whatever ports inbound you're going to use above 1024. Installing a Jamf IM instance is another good document in the Jamf docs. And the script. So thanks to professional services, the script is now on GitHub/Jamf professional services/multigem. And so with that, I'd like to bring up Oliver Lindsay. He has a word about support from Jamf.
Hey, everyone. Oh, yeah. Good round of applause. Hear me now? There we go. So thank you for that great run-through of what you've done. It's really cool. I thought it would be polite not to make a non-Jamf employee discuss Jamf support policies. So basically what Mike's done is he's realized, you know, there's nothing intrinsically about this product that I can't customize it to do what I need it to do. Even though Jamf didn't think of this use case and didn't sort of automate it into their installer, I can figure this out. And that's great. And people do sort of weird stuff like this all the time with our products, and we love that. For example, people will take the custom installer for Jamf Pro itself and use it on all sorts of weird operating systems. You know, they'll run it on like Raspberry Pis. And like, works great. You know what you're doing? Awesome. But if you're gonna call like first tier support and say, oh, look, I have my Jim, you know, I work in this massive global organization. We have 50 domains, and look what I've done on the server. And it's not working, so fix it. They might be a little skittish. So, you know, the worst case scenario when you do something, you know, when you're kind of going off the plan, bad metaphor. You know, if you're doing something a little odd, is that you might have to do a plain vanilla install, reproduce the issue, and then say, hey, support, look, it's not anything weird that I've done. It's just, it's really is a situation with the product. And so that's all I wanted to say about that.
Great.
Want to take some questions?
Absolutely.
Andy's got a mic. I'd love to hear a little bit about, this is actually a much bigger crowd than I expected. Now, I know there are a lot of people using Jim, and there's certainly lots of questions about it, but you know, I thought this was sort of a niche topic, and there's lots of other really good sessions going on now. So I'd love to hear you know, what brings you into the room today. And your questions.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I work as a Jamf integrator, so I see people needing all kinds of custom gym environments all the time. The same kind of situation that you've run into, multiple domains, but needing some way to economically run multiple gyms. So this is a really nice work that you've done. My question is, do you know if you're running on dedicated Jamf Cloud? That is, do you know that your gyms are always talking to a single public IP? A lot of Jamf Cloud customers run on shared instances. The IPs change all the time, so I wonder if we'd have to accommodate that in the script somehow.
Yeah, so we are on a dedicated Jamf instance with a dedicated hosts file on that instance.
Okay, right.
But our IPs do change, as I mentioned. So what we've had to do to accommodate the change is we have to open firewall rules. Again, it's just the outbound 443 port that has to be open. That's the only thing we've seen issues with when the IP changes.
Gotcha, thanks.
Does everyone know what he's talking about? As so many of our IT services, historically, a firewall rule was point this IP address to this IP address, nothing else, right? But as more and more of our IT services moving into the cloud, including Jamf Cloud, but including everything else in the world too, that whole paradigm of how we used to set up firewall rules is breaking down because, the way that Azure or, Amazon Web Services work, your instance can move and they're going to move it, based on their operational needs, and there's nothing Jamf or you can do about it, right? So it becomes a real hassle.
Same boat as him, I'm an integrator. Will this scenario also work on Windows?
In theory, it should work on anything that runs Java, right? I mean, if you wanted to install a Jamf, this on Mac, we don't have an installer for it, but you take that Java applet, install it on your Mac, and figure out how to change initd to launch D, sure. Basically, when you look at the script, you'll see that you need, Rich had a slide, sorry. You had a slide on that.
On the script?
Mike had a slide on what it is that you need to duplicate, right? So it's just a Java, set of jars, essentially, right? But then it's got config files, right? So you just duplicate that folder and say, when you enroll it, you'll have to give each one a different port. You'll have to give it a different path to find its config files and different logs directory. And that's it, right? So there's nothing really platform dependent about it.
For clarity, you'll support this now?
No one's going to support this.
Okay.
Unless you want to hire some Jamf professional services. Now, that said, support's not going to throw you out of the room, right? They're going to do their best job. But if you have a problem that they think is related to some customization you did, they might ask you to reproduce it in a plain vanilla install, right?
Thank you.
But you can certainly hit us up on Jamf Nation, and we'll be happy to answer questions.
Rich has a question.
To follow up on the multiple instances on one server, did you guys ever investigate using Docker to kind of, because in that case, each gym would think it's running its own thing, but you have it in its own Linux container?
So we did not. When we started looking at this initially, it was, the hope was just to try and get it up and running on one just quick Linux instance. We didn't look at Docker or any of the other options.
I find sometimes that when I go into an organization that's, they've outsourced all their server, print, file services, networking, they have a very standard maintained sort of setup. Like, you want a Linux server, here's what you get. And even your ability to install a package requires a security view, tickets, cases, meetings, delays. It's not like you're just got command line sudo access on production servers at a lot, particularly financial services. You just don't get it. So, a lot of the flexibility that we have at a more dynamic organization, software oriented, you sometimes don't always get at these places. So, limits us.
Thanks. Yeah, another integrator here. I'm guessing this would work for both multiple LDAP and multiple Jamf Cloud instances as well?
It should. I don't see why it wouldn't.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question because I was so overtaken by the fact that I recognize your voice.
Uh-oh.
Are you famous? I think you might be famous
No, that's someone else.
in the podcasting world. I apologize.
Some poor
So,
unfortunate person who sounds like me.
what was the question?
The question was, would this work for multiple Jamf Cloud instances pointing to multiple LDAP? Environments where people may have prod,
Right.
dev,
Yeah.
or multiple customers.
So the security on there, that's username and password and firewall based. There's no bidirectional TLS, right? So there's no reason that you can't, like, for example, do you have your test Jamf server going through the same gyms?
We do, yep.
Yes.
So we just had to do the
he's proved
enrollment.
he's proven it works.
Yes,
Do that.
beautiful.
Right, as long as you got that firewall open and the same username and passwords are set up in both instances. The gym has no idea which Jamf Cloud or Jamf Pro instance is talking to it. It just knows it got an incoming LDAP connection, it's got the right username and password, I'm passing it on to AD.
But once again, obviously not supported.
Nope.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't see any problem with that.
No.
Right? Like, there's nothing in the design that says you shouldn't do that. Now, it may be like in the next version. There will be another version of Jim. I'm not in a position to announce when, but it may well be that there's going to be a whole lot more security on that. Right? Like you'll need to make sure that you've got the same client certificate to authenticate into that service.
No, lovely, fantastic work, really good.
Thank you.
Any other
Anyone else?
questions?
Yeah. When I saw the title of the session, I kind of thought it was going to go a little different. So I'm going to ask the question anyway, but even though it's not exactly what you've done. As far as supporting LDAP in a complex environment, we found that there's problems with resolution when the group and the user are in different domains. And I was wondering if there's any progress as far as supporting more complex LDAP installations.
So you're saying that you might have two domains with the same user, both contain the same username?
The
Or same group name?
would be in one domain, the user is in another domain in LDAP,
Right.
and it breaks. It doesn't resolve that. You need to have the user and the group in the same domain.
So I've heard of that before. Usually what I do is I'm not an AD expert, right? So, I'm pretty good with AD when I've got one domain. But, a lot of enterprises have someone who's really sharp. And I understand that the way that you set up cross-domain lookups is pretty granular. I'm not an expert on it. But, that issue may have, we're just doing standard LDAP, right? And we don't have any logic built in to sort of, try and resolve all the different things that enterprises can do. I'd like to think that as we go more to cloud identity services and we support group lookups and some of the custom APIs that the big ones have, that, it's much flatter, right? You don't see people setting up, 20 different instances for their organization. So I'd like to think this is a problem we're not going to have to deal with so much over time, but I have no advice for you other than to collar that enterprise's AD expert and say, explain how you've got your cross-domain permissions working because this LD, and just, you can, sometimes I just write I take Jamf completely out of the picture. I just give them the LDAP command that I just write on the command line and say, run this and make it work. What else can I do?
Over here. This is also somewhat tangential and selfish of me to ask, but I'm starting at a new gig that's using OneLogin's VLDAP, and I have yet to get it to work with Jamf Pro as a directory service. If anybody has done that, please find me. Even OneLogin is trying to get me to pay a third-party Jamf Pro partner they have to try and make something seemingly very simple work, so just a shameless plug if anybody's made that happen.
So are they offering, you know anything about it? Are they offering LDAP interface like Google and like Azure do?
No.
No.
It's very, very watered down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly we're going to be transitioning from an LDAP world to a cloud, identity service world. So there's some big players there. That sounds like one of them. I use it. I don't use their enterprise stuff, but I certainly use it on my desktop. So, The issue is that, unlike the LDAP standard, a lot of these companies, they have SAML SSO as a standard for identification, for identifying a user, but no real consistent way of doing group membership lookups. And also we have the issue that DEP enrollment still doesn't support anything but LDAP, right? So we're still stuck with this for a while. Some of the, Azure Domain Services sort of puts an LDAP cover. We just announced Google, is going to do an LDAP interface into their IDP. So maybe you just have to ask them. And also go, put a feature request saying, hey, I'd like you to support, these features that I need inside Jamf working with this third-party service, and, we'll get to them as demand and time allow, I'm sure.
There are definitely a ton of other cloud-based directory services that work perfectly well with Jamf Pro. OneLogin is just not one of them, at least until I know, so appreciate it.
All right. If we get enough interest, like we have product owners that talk, we're doing a lot more integration. So, they will talk, our product owners talk to their product owners, and magic happens sometimes.
OneLogin is on the marketplace for Jamf.
Oh, well, all right. Talk to me after this, because I'm going to introduce you to someone who probably knows them.
So this is actually a question for the Jamf
Oh, you
folks.
again. Here
Me
we
again.
go. This one's yours.
So, no, this is actually for the Jamf thing because it has to do with Java development.
Oh.
So we're coming to the end of the life cycle for JDK 8. Support for that ends in January 2019. Can you comment on what the roadmap is forward, since the license for JDK 8 has been revised to remove production use from the list of acceptable free uses? You can do prototyping, you can do testing, you can do development. You can't use it in production anymore without paying Oracle. So what's the plan?
I might be able to answer this.
Yeah, I
one.
was going to say, this is going right over to Deb.
Hi, I'm a Java engineer at Jamf. I'm not sure what I'm at liberty to say, per se, but we are aware of that, and we do have plans to address it. So don't panic yet.
Okay, so I can panic later?
Maybe.
Thank you.
You raised an interesting question. Like a customer like Rich, pretty well connected. He can get someone from product owners on the line and get an individual response, probably via email, right?
Yes.
But, for the average user, if you don't have 50,000 devices under management, post publicly on Jamf Nation, get it visible, get other people commenting on it, and invite Jamf to discuss it and say it's something that's worrying you, right, as you plan forward. I think that's completely reasonable. And also, call into support and get a case open on it. And it'll be their responsibility to get you the answer that you need.
Yes, a post on Jamf Nation will normally get addressed by the appropriate product owner, who will be able to talk much more specifically about it.
But you do raise a good point, right? It's not just Jamf Pro, right? We've got a lot of little, Java stuff out there that's all got to come along for the ride. So, good point.
Any more questions? Okay, well, please join me in thanking Mike and Oliver for their time today.